Okay, ready to jump into this deep dive.
Let's do it.
We're looking at some pretty crucial legal updates for law enforcement today.
Yeah, based on this source material, federal and Supreme Court legal updates for police.
Right. And our mission here is simple. Pull out the most important bits, explain them clearly like you're hearing this for the first time, just so you can quickly get a handle on the legal world police work in.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how these updates, whether from Congress or the Supreme Court, are just constantly, well, shaping how policing happens.
That's always evolving.
Like the ground rules are subtly shifting all the time.
Okay, so the source kicks off with federal statutory changes.
Mm-hmm.
It notes that, while state laws and
Yeah.
maybe federal court rulings often drive the day-to-day procedures for your average local officer,
Routine stuff.
these new federal laws, these statutes, they're still incredibly important, especially in certain specific fields.
Absolutely. And the source explains why that is. It's particularly relevant for officers in, say, specialized roles or maybe joint task forces.
Because federal law can create whole new offenses or provide new tools for investigations or just affect how local agencies work together on bigger cases.
Right. So we're talking about areas where federal jurisdiction often comes into play because of the type of crime or its scale.
Exactly.
What specific examples does the source give us?
Well, it points to things like human trafficking, drug trafficking, big one. There's fentanyl, especially crossing state lines, cybercrime, of course, firearms regulations,
It's always changing.
and even domestic extremism, where it intersects with law enforcement concerns.
So these are areas where federal changes can directly impact what officers are investigating and how.
Precisely. It gives them new targets or new rules.
And it's not just about defining new crimes, is it? I think the source also mentioned things like new grant programs.
Yeah, funding initiatives or maybe changes to existing federal laws that officers on task forces might enforce.
Or even new data reporting requirements, stuff like that.
Exactly. It's the whole legal framework plus the resources tied to it. So let's paint a picture. Congress passes a big new law cracking down on fentanyl distribution networks, or maybe updates federal rules on certain types of firearms.
Right.
That's the kind of statutory change our source says police really need to be clued into. It might not change a basic traffic stop,
Probably not.
but it definitely changes the game for those specific, often complex investigations.
Exactly. It affects those specific domains of police work.
Okay, let's pivot a bit because the source really highlights another critical area: U.S. Supreme Court decisions.
Absolutely vital.
If federal laws change the what sometimes, these SCOTUS rulings often change the fundamental how of policing, right? Nationwide.
And this is where it gets really foundational. Supreme Court rulings interpret the Constitution itself.
Which means they're binding everywhere.
Everywhere. They set the baseline standard for law enforcement across the country. Huge implications for how officers interact with the public.
And our source flags some core legal concepts the court is always refining, the ones every single officer just has to understand.
Yes, it lists 4 key areas specifically: use of force,
Okay.
qualified immunity,
Hear that one a lot.
search and seizure, and Miranda rights. These are like the bedrock legal principles for police work.
Let's quickly unpack maybe one or two for someone new. Use of force, that's about the legal limits on how much force an officer can use and when.
Pretty much. It boils down to the constitutional standard of reasonableness. What a reasonable officer would do in that exact moment, balancing individual rights against, the government's interest in safety.
Got it. And qualified immunity, you mentioned we hear that term often. The source flags it because SCOTUS rulings define when officers might be personally liable in a lawsuit.
Right, unless they violated a clearly established constitutional right that, well, any reasonable officer should have known about. It's about accountability within a really tough job.
And search and seizure, that's Fourth Amendment territory, defining how and when police can legally search people or property and gather evidence.
Exactly. Rulings here might clarify, say, using drug dogs during traffic stops, or what exactly counts as probable cause for a search warrant.
It's amazing how detailed these rulings get, setting the boundaries for basic police actions. And Miranda, the right to remain silent, warning.
That's the one. Setting rules for questioning someone who's in custody.
All these areas seem to involve this constant balancing act.
They really do. Balancing fundamental citizen rights against the practical needs of law enforcement to investigate crime and keep people safe, it's inherently complex.
Which leads directly to the source's final, really crucial point: the absolute need for continuous legal training in all these areas.
You got it. To police constitutionally, effectively, officers just have to stay current. The law doesn't stand still.
It really hammers home that point.
It underscores the core message, I think. Law enforcement operates in this incredibly complex, always shifting legal world. Staying updated isn't just nice to have, it's fundamental to doing the job right.
So quick recap from the source. We've got new federal laws popping up in specific crime areas like drug trafficking or firearms.
Is creating new legal ground.
And then you have these binding Supreme Court decisions constantly fine-tuning the basic rules for things like searches, use of force, questioning suspects.
It just paints a picture of a profession where staying informed is this constant, critical challenge.
Which leaves us with a thought, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Building on what the source suggests. In a world where laws and how we interpret them are always changing, what does it really take for anyone, police, or just, us to truly stay informed and understand the rules shaping our lives?
That's a really important question to think about.